Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at 1993 Topps FantaSports. And FantaSports is not a Coca-Cola based soft drink card set. It's not that at all. It is an amazing turn by Topps. It's one of the most impressive things Topps ever did. And it was an absolutely necessary step for them to take, even though it was something that ultimately would not pan out down the road. It was a part of an important creative process that they were in right at this time in the early 90s. Topps needed to be thinking outside of the box. They absolutely needed that because prior to 1990, they had always kind of been the card market, just period. They just naturally were. And they were a card company that has always operated at the bare minimum. They do just enough and they figure out good ideas and then they stick with them and they let everybody else do really stupid stuff. And it's worked well enough that, look, at the end of the day, they won. They're pretty much the only card company standing at this point. But they have always done so with a very heavy hand, and occasionally they will get caught flat-footed. And that's exactly what happened in 1990 when they realized that they had basically lost the card market and they had to earn it back. And so over the next couple of years, they were thinking outside of the box in ways that only Topps could, and that Topps only would when they absolutely needed to, which they needed to. So in 1991, we saw Stadium Club. In 1992, we saw a really big swing in the creation of Topps Finest. And the thing about Topps Finest was they were basically trying to reinvent the card market by not just catching up or trying to surpass, but in fact trying to step ahead and say, we're going to invent something else that everybody else is going to have to catch up to. That was what they wanted to do to establish themselves as the de facto card company. But they didn't want to just be constrained to the normal process of cards and figuring out new ways of cards. They also wanted to evolve their interactive engagement with fans, something that Stadium Club had done, but in the card market here in the early 90s, interaction with fans had already taken on a much larger presence in the card market. There were special card sets you could get. There were special clubs that you could be a part of. There were special card opportunities that would pop up for a rare number of people, and they wanted to go out and get just that. There was a three-dimensionality to card collecting at the higher end, and Topps wanted to play around with that, but not do it in the way that people normally did. And so they created an interactive game. But not just an interactive game, because games are nothing new in cards. For crying out loud, that's how Topps started. So there have been games that were just pieces of a game that you play. There have been scratchers, lottery ticket style scratchers that are instant wins. They have had contests like Crash the Game. There have been a number of different types of interactive cards to the point where even in 1991 when Wildcard came out, nobody has done anything like what Wildcard did. These different approaches to interactive games were a lot of fun, but they were all one-dimensional. They didn't have a back and forth. They weren't competitive. And that's what Topps wanted to add. They wanted to add the competitive component to it, and that's what they did with Topps FantaSports, which is a fantasy league. And that's the Fanta in FantaSports, Fantasy League. Now, fantasy leagues did exist, but they weren't very common because we were still in an analog world. And now in a digital world, it makes so much sense to make fantasy leagues because you have the ability to have constant interaction. So you can put together a league, everybody has their players, they can trade like GMs. That whole model works well when you are together in one room, in one space. But it doesn't work well when you're spread out and you don't have a virtual room to use. And in 1993, we still didn't really have an internet at the end of the day. It was there. Some people used it, but for the most part, it was still this far off idea. It was kind of like the thing that tech geeks talked about and real people didn't use. It was that kind of a model. So how do you do a fantasy league that is beyond just a couple of friends or an office pool or some place where people are interacting? With no internet, you had basically two options. You had a mail order or you had over the phone. Both of those are pretty tricky. Over the phone is a little bit easier, but still you have to have some moderation of the process. But Topps decided, you know what, let's figure this out. Let's go ahead and put this together. And they chose 4 different markets to do a test run of a fantasy league. They chose Houston, Kansas City, Buffalo, and Washington, D.C. And in these markets, they set up, I don't know if it's a certain number of slots that people could fill out. So I don't know how many people were involved. But regardless of how many were involved, every person who paid the $159 entry fee, which was a lot of money at the time, was put into a 12-person league. And there were a bunch of 12-person leagues in each market, and then of course across all 4 markets. Now, if you had a bunch of friends, you could put together your own little league within all of these. So you could predefine a league if you had enough people. I don't know if you had, say, 5 people, you could start a league, and then you would get the additional 7 participants would be added in by Topps. I don't know how that worked, but you did have the ability to carve out your own corner of it with your own 12-person league. But Topps was managing this whole thing, and for anybody who was not a part of a predefined league, they were just randomly put in with other participants in these random leagues. And every single league competed within its own cocoon. There was a pretty impressive prize, though, which justified the ridiculously high $159 entry fee. Because while every single league had its own competition and there was one winner in each league, the person who, of all of the first place winners, the winner who got the single highest score amongst all of the leagues, that person won the big national prize. Think of it like the NCAA's national championship. It's that kind of a model where they just figured out, okay, well, you're the best of everybody. We're not going to have you compete with everybody else. We just know you're the best. It was mathematically based here, but that meant that whoever won the most points of anybody got quite a prize. 4 tickets to the Super Bowl, all expense paid. With $1,000 spending money on top of that, they got a jacket. They got a game-used football from the Super Bowl. They also got another football that was a FantaSports football. For crying out loud, they got a championship ring. The championship ring for the winning team, they got one of those. It was a ridiculous prize. And so you can imagine that there would be quite a bit of competition. Now, again, I don't know how many participants there were, so I don't know how big this got. But those were the stakes. And within each individual league, there were the top 3. So anybody who won their particular league got a full set of cards. And I'll get to the cards in a minute. But that was the prize that they got. And anybody who won one of the individual weeks, because there were 18 weeks, and so anybody who won in their league, won one of the weeks, they would get a card that corresponded with that. So those were the prizes. And then there was one additional, it was basically a pool of all the number 1 winners, all the winners of the leagues who didn't win the national prize. There was an additional prize that was almost the same as the national prize that was from a pool of all of the other main winners. They got everything that the main winner got, the tickets, all of that, except they did not get the game ball and they did not get the championship ring. So that was the difference between them, but that meant that 2 people got 4 tickets to the Super Bowl and some other stuff, which was pretty good. So for anybody who did enter into the league, the first thing that they got was a care package. And this care package is really impressive. It is a slipcover box with inside of it what is basically kind of like a big booklet. It's not quite a booklet. It is a clamshell. It is an oversized clamshell, but inside they had a set of cards, which again I'll get to, and then they had some booklets, basically all the instructions that they needed in order to play the game. And that was what the participants got to kick it all off. Now, the 3 booklets provided them with all the information that they needed for playing the game. First off, they had a booklet called the Game Plan. This was the instructions, and in it they talked about how the game was played, and they also talked about the prizes, and so they gave all of those components. But also, at the end of it, they had a whole list of all the players and the corresponding digits that go along with the player. And the reason I say digits is because the way that the game was played was there was a toll-free number, and you call in the toll-free number and you punch in who you are, and then at the very beginning of the league you punch in the digits for the players that you want on your roster. And once that's in, you technically don't need to do anything till the end. But every single week, you do have the ability to adjust your roster. One thing that you might notice, though, is that there's no back and forth. This was not a fixed number of players that everybody chooses from. Everybody could choose the same player, so everybody could have Emmitt Smith through the whole season, Jerry Rice through the whole season. And that was part of how the game was played. It was who can figure out the best combination of players where everybody is using the same players for those combinations. So I don't know how many ties they may have ended up with, because when you get out across 18 weeks, there's a lot of variety that can happen. But you start off with your roster, and then every single week you can adjust your roster as you need, because if a player gets injured, you don't want to run that player. If a player is traded to another team, that also might affect the player. And depending on who the opponent is, if your wide receiver is going up against a team with a great secondary and a terrible run defense, then your receiver is probably not going to get very many yards, because the running back's going to be getting a lot of yards. So you had the ability to adjust the roster through the course of the year. And so every single week you could call one time, get the results that you had from the week before so you could keep track of that, and you can make changes to your roster as you went through. So it was truly an interactive game that was based upon strategy and luck, the combination of the two. And like I said, when you get to the end of the year, the winner of your league gets the various prizes, etc. And so everybody is competing for trying to not just get the most points at the end, but also even just being a winner per week that also had its advantage. So the numbers at the end of that first brochure are the digits that you punch in order to say, this is who I'm going to have on my roster. That allowed them to have an analog-based system for interaction that then plugged into a computer that had the two-dimensionality that they needed in order to keep all the information in order and keep track of the season. So that's the model that they used. The second brochure is called By the Numbers, and this is the breakdown so that you can see all of the diagnostic information you need to know about the players. This is used basically for planning. And then the third brochure was their weekly roster. And the weekly roster, very simply, is a booklet that just gives you the space to fill out your team. So the teams were broken down into a bunch of different skill players. You had quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, you had kickers and punters, and you had a defense. And that was what made up your team. So you can change that as you go through the season, so you can actually keep track of how things were going in order to make sure you were following along and to see trends that you may see as well. But that was what they had in the box, except they did also have a set of cards, and that set of cards came in a big black box. And this card set is the card set we know of as the Topps FantaSports. These cards are not critical to the game. It's Topps. Of course they're going to be making cards. So this is actually the reason that big booklet, the clamshell, was so thick, was so that those cards could fit into it, or the box of cards could fit into it. But the cards are a 200 card set, because that is the fixed number of players that they specified for the league. And every single card has a Stadium Club-like card back where it breaks down the statistical qualities that each player had for you to keep track of. And actually, this was a good move because it gave the players the ability to play almost like with playing cards. They could have a different level of interactivity with their players so that they could keep track of it in more of a dynamic fashion. And that was the kit that they provided for the participants. Now, the cards themselves are very similar to Tall Boys, but they're not Tall Boys. They're a little bit bigger, but they're not quite as big as the late 1970s Topps basketball cards that were ridiculously oversized. They're about half size between those two sizes. But that means these do not fit into any card pages at all. So don't look to put them in. If you do, you're putting them into a 4-card card page and they're just going to slide around. There's just too much room. Unfortunately, they're not usable, and I don't know why they chose this size, but that's the size they chose. The card design, however, is the same card design as the regular Topps cards. It's bigger, obviously, but it has a black border and it has the gold foil. So it's like the gold foil parallel of the regular cards, only bigger and with a black border. Gorgeous black border, And this really does show you just what the regular Topps cards could have been, even the parallel. I mean, in 1992, when Leaf did their gold parallel, the gold cards had a black border. They could have done this with Topps in 1993. Topps could have looked and gone, you know, that's a good idea. They didn't, but at least we have the FantaSports cards. Now, like I said, anybody who won one of the weeks, they got a card as a prize, and anybody who won their league got a 12 card, or not a 12 card, an 18 card set of weekly winners. And what this is a weekly, it's a winner version of cards. These are not parallels. There were basically the top 18 players from the course of the year were all given winner cards. These cards were assigned somewhat randomly to whichever week they became a prize for one of the weeks. And so that means that if you win a week, say you win week 11, then you get in return the winner card for week 11. And like I said, if you won the whole league, you got all 18 cards, which meant you got the cards for all of the weeks that you won, plus the weeks you did not win. The number of these cards that have been created, I have not seen any record of exactly how many. The estimation is that there are 50 cards. I don't know. The fact is that you're probably not going to have a fixed number because you have the people who did not win the league, plus the people who did win the league. They get all the same cards, and the person who did win the league also gets a number of cards that only they get and the other participants didn't. So there's a good chance that there is a varied number of these cards. Who knows? But at any rate, the winner cards are very, very rare, so they're tough to come by. And anybody who did win, well, everybody got a certificate of merit, basically a participation brochure, something that they could say something that they could frame to say that they competed in the league. But if they were one of the top 3 winners, they actually got a special winner's certificate. And this basically said how they did in the league. So if they were, say, the second highest in the league, it specifies that they were the second highest. So these were a fun little den item, another little element tossed into the whole makeup of how this league worked. So it was a really interesting idea. It was a fun idea they came up with at a time when technology wasn't perfectly set up for what they intended to do. The league didn't work well enough for them to embark on a second year. So we don't know where they would have gone with it, but it does beg the question, why aren't they doing that now? I mean, now that Fanatics has bought Topps, you would think, well, this would be perfect for Fanatics. And maybe they'll come up with this idea. But for one brief moment, at a time when Topps was desperately scrambling to try to earn its place in the card market, it did something that was way out there and really shows just what the company is capable of if they desperately need to. And I wish they'd done more of this, but at least we did get this little glimpse of creativity, this little fun piece of the whole card market, as weird as it is. So that's the story of Topps FantaSports. If you have any questions, please ask, and I'll answer whatever I can. I don't have a lot of knowledge past what I've already given you, because this is pretty much in depth as to how this game worked, but I'll do my best. And if you haven't subscribed already, definitely do so. Check out my other videos. And thank you very much for watching.